Welcome to the Diabetes Podcast, where real stories meet real science, helping you take charge, not just take medicine. Today we're talking with someone who wears a lot of hats in the diabetes world, Dr. Patrick Rowe, professor of health sciences at Santa Fe College, a person living with type 1 diabetes for nearly 4 decades, and the dad of 2 kids who also live with type 1. This conversation is real-life diabetes management at home. How to balance vigilance with letting kids be kids, what language helps avoid shame around food, and why homeostasis isn't just a textbook word. It's a daily cockpit full of dials for families like Patrick's. We also dig into tech, CGMs, automated insulin delivery, and practical strategies for sports and activity, plus the power of curiosity, community, and better education to turn chaos into confidence. If you're a parent who's newly navigating type 1, or a seasoned pro looking for fresh ideas, this one's for you. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Diabetes Podcast. I'm Richie.
I'm Amber.
And Amber, we're in for a treat today. Today we're talking with Dr. Patrick Rowe, professor of health sciences at Santa Fe College. Dr. Rowe, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So I know that Richie introduced you in your role as professor, and I do want to talk about that if the conversation leads, but mostly I would love to get your perspective as someone who has type 1 diabetes, as someone who has 2 children living with type 1 diabetes, and what a day in the life of that is.
Absolutely. It's weird. I think the first thing I think of when you kind of ask that question is, or bring up that topic is how naive I was to be managing it myself for, I don't know what it is now, 37 years. And, in the last 15 years, I feel like I've sort of got a pretty good handle on it. I kind of know I made all kinds of mistakes. I did all the typical stuff. And then I became curious and looked for more information and tried to kind of science it to get a little more in control. And so then at that point, when I was pretty well in control, then I have one and then later 2 kids with type 1. And so I somehow thought that, I hate to say this word, but I somehow thought it would be kind of easy to manage kids with type 1 when I've had all these years of experience. And it's almost funny that I thought that years ago, because being aware of my decision-making processes throughout the day is like, could not be more different than like managing at arm's length 2 other human beings that want to just do what kids want to do. And you can't, you can only say so many times, these blood sugar numbers matter. We need to pre-bolus. When you eat something and we're not, mom and dad are around, you need to get insulin. Like you get to a point where you have to sort of learn where to back off and where to let them just be a kid on Saturday morning and not be a kid with type 1 so much. And I never just sort of let it go wild, but they're sick of hearing the same stuff. They're sick of hearing the things that I'm tired of saying all the time. It's an interesting back and forth that is far from easy. Again, even though I have all this experience myself with it, that's kind of the thing that really, I think, almost daily occurs to me, that I can look at my numbers and I'm keeping them, pretty boring, but and then there's some sort of party after school and someone's handed out little Debbies or something, and I'm watching this number just climb. And, they want to do what kids want to do. They want to eat the same things that their friends want to do, and they don't want to be left out. And I know that, so you're kind of like, we've learned to sort of approach those things differently. Like later in the day, it'll be like, what happened? What was after school care like today? What'd you guys do? What the question I want to ask if they were adults is, what the heck did you eat to make your blood sugars shoot up to 300 or something? But you have to say it a little differently and be like, did you have a good day? After school care, what'd you do? Did you, and just trying to ask questions that lead to so-and-so brought some snacks, or so and so let me have some of her stuff, or like something's going on, but you don't want to say something that sounds like, well, you chose poorly.
Of
That doesn't
course, like,
sound good at
way
all.
to make a bad decision, kid. Like that's
Right. No
probably
adult wants
not
to
the
hear
way
that.
to
Right.
parent. Right, right.
No, it's not. And
Oh
we don't want to give
man,
them a food complex. I feel like we're already sort of doing
exactly.
that. We don't want to give them a serious food complex. Um, so I think I try to talk about food all the time. And I know my kids have much more of like a nutrition understanding than all their peers. I see that, like last week
For sure.
at Boy Scouts, we were doing like a teach the this group of kids at Nate's age, my older son's age, to kind of introduce them to how to cook things in the kitchen. My son is so familiar with food and and how to do things, and he's looking at something and he's like, wow, that's a lot of carbs. He's like, holy, he's like, carbs it's not great to have that much carbs. And I was like, okay, I was like, back it up, Nate. That's not, like, you're like, I get what you're saying, I understand, I agree with you, but yeah. Like, kids don't talk about macros, like he's talking about carbohydrates, and like, so it was endearing to me, but also realized how different a house we live in, different world.
Yeah. You're like, oh, I taught him well. And then you're like, wait, no, back it up,
Yeah.
backpedal.
Yeah.
Goodness. That sounds like a lot to navigate. And it sounds like, you know, as a diabetes educator and dietitian, like I get where you're coming from and what you're saying, but it sounds like it'd be so hard to relate to other parents and understanding of what that kind of life is like, or what all those decisions are like in a day. Especially, I'm imagining if I was a mother of two wonderful children who happen to have type 1, and I hear another mother talk about, oh, today was so challenging because da da da. I feel like I'd have a complex, like, you don't even know challenging. Like, let me tell you about
My wife,
like my one
yeah,
upsmanship
often.
here in a bad way. Like, oh gosh.
Right. Because my wife is constantly aware of this, where she hears, she's a professor, she does research, she teaches, she's got a lot of stuff on her
That's
plate,
awesome.
and she's going after grants, and then some of the other parents, like they have maybe 3 times the available time to put into like grant applications, and and she feels like, if they only knew, like, that it's almost like we have like 4 kids or something, that like, and they're never not needing you, because you're always connected to blood sugars and the school nurses, and um and she gets comments from, how are they doing or something, how they doing with the diabetes, and she's like, I don't think anyone has any idea of the amount of effort and mental resources you use to sort of balance someone else's body functions, let
Oh
alone
my
2 of them.
gosh. I can't
Yeah.
imagine. Like I see it every single day and I still can't imagine what that would be like. I just can't. And to answer a question like how's their diabetes? Like that's so, I hate to say there's no,
Yeah.
there's no such thing as a bad question, but that's really kind of a bad question. Like I hate to say that, but
It is. It's like, yeah, and she always says, like, I want to actually give them a real answer, but they don't want the real answer, and
oh
so
yeah.
they'll be kind of like, whoa, I don't want all that, but well,
Right.
here's what
It's
happened in the
yeah.
last 12 hours. Yeah.
Right, like,
Yeah.
"How's your
We didn't
day?" People
sleep.
ask that, but they really don't want the answer, especially not
Right.
from, "Well, my day started this and the blood sugars were high, and so we had to give this insulin, then finally it came down, and then they had a low, and then we had to do the snack," and oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's just constant. When I'm teaching anatomy, I try to instill in them, I was like, all the like the idea of homeostasis. That's like one of my favorite terms for anatomy and physiology, is like, things need to be, everything in the body is kind of in this normal range, kind of like you're staring at a cockpit and you've got all these gauges. You want them all to be kind of in that middle zone. And I was like, so with diabetes and me, I'm like, I'm kind of running on manual, like, and I was like, don't take for granted all these processes your body can do to keep everything in homeostasis, because when they no longer are, you're thinking a lot about just that one thing that's sort of out of whack, whether it's blood pressure or, cardiovascular risk, heart failure, diabetes and blood sugars, you don't get the alerts. You don't get the tweaks that happen when it goes too high, then it brings it back down. And when it gets too low, it brings it back high. We're doing all that kind of through, mental arithmetic and insulin dosing and timing the foods and choosing the foods and don't take for granted all these processes that normally work on autopilot.
And you're flying three planes
that's
at once.
right.
Oh my
poor
gosh.
wife with all three of them on her phone, yeah. Occasionally she tells me, yeah, you're low. Do you know that I get eat sugar while I'm at work or something? I'm like, I know. She tries to more focus her efforts on the kids, but once in a while I'll get a reminder, eat something. Yeah.
So Patrick, I got a question, and I'm going to try and phrase it. I'm going to try and phrase it delicately. I know that we're all not guaranteed tomorrow, right? But in your kid's situation, they really aren't, unless they're being incredibly, the word I would take is probably vigilant, right? Unless they're aware every single day of biological processes that kids take for granted or probably aren't even aware of. How do you ingrain and maintain that level of vigilance in this particular population that really is just very much concerned with just being a kid, just being normal and going out and playing and doing all the kind of normal stuff?
Yeah, I think I'm constantly saying phrases like, you can eat, like whatever the snacks are at home. I'm like, by all means, when your stomach says you want to eat something or you're bored, you want to eat, I'm like, go ahead and eat. We just have to make sure that we're getting insulin on board, because, and I used to put notes on the fridge that would show like normal numbers, you're like, this is kind of the range you want to keep you in. I think I had it on the back of one of their phones for their CGMs. I kind of put it all over the place. And so I try to surround them with like the awareness that like, it isn't that food's bad. It's just that you need to stop and just think for a second, a few seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds about how insulin is going to play a role in what you're going to eat. And like different foods will just shoot it up and others will do hardly anything. So you don't have to think too much about insulin. Just that I think I've said a number of times, if we pay attention to it, like you'll have a long, healthy life ahead of you. It's the ignoring it that runs you into all kinds of problems that will interfere with life in many different ways.
Absolutely.
And so, because I'm always telling myself that, pay attention to something when you don't want it to get in the way of things. It doesn't mean you need to have half of your day spent focused on diabetes, but the awareness, and a lot of the awareness I keep going back to is like knowing what your blood sugars are. And so like, I know it was like a game changer when I got a watch that could show me my numbers just so I can glance at it. I always wonder how many times a day I look at that number, and they have a phone, but those numbers are always coming back to mom and dad and the nurse. And so, I feel like they're probably not as aware as I'd like them to be of their numbers throughout the day. They're doing their thing. They hear an alarm or they get a call from the nurse to come visit them because their sugar's low or it's high. So I'm always trying to make them at least aware of their numbers so they can kind of make decisions. And often they surprise me. They really do.
I bet.
They'll say like just the things you don't know what's landing, I guess. You say things all the time. And like the other day Gabe was like, like he's eating an apple. Like, did you take insulin for that? No, my blood sugar is pretty low, so I'm going to wait a few minutes before I give insulin. I'm kind of like thrown back, like, wow, like good. I'm like, you the man, Gabe. Like that's
so
I like hearing this stuff. Yeah.
And I think I have a good friend who worked in endocrinology with kids, pediatric endocrinology. And I think one of her biggest frustrations as an educator in that spot, and as somebody who also has type 1 diabetes, some of the parents not either, I don't want to say not caring, but not understanding the gravity of the awareness, like just not really paying as much attention as they need to. So what you said about attention is really the crux of it all. Like that is so important. And I've seen that, being a diabetes educator for over 20 years, the people who pay attention, even if the blood sugars aren't perfect, overall have way better outcomes than those that are just like that either have shame around something or they just know I know it's bad, so I don't pay attention. And those are the people that end up in the hospital in diabetic ketoacidosis or get the ER, get 911 called by their family that finds them on the floor because they had a major hypoglycemic event. And I think to speak to what Richie said about that fear, I think if you're very aware, it allows space to not really be as fearful. I think there's always going to be some level as a parent, especially as a parent of someone who needs insulin to live. And I think that's a dynamic for those who are listening who have type 2 diabetes. That's just a good pause to, again, explain the difference between type 1 diabetes and type 2. I know we have all different listeners from all different backgrounds and experience with diabetes. And those who've been listening for some time understand the difference between type 1 and type 2. But we have new listeners as well. So type 1 is autoimmune diabetes. That is where the pancreatic beta cells are pretty much depleted because of an autoimmune attack. And Patrick, is there anything regarding that you would like to, now's your chance, for all the people who don't understand the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes, what would you like people to know as very key differences and struggles and things that you deal with that maybe someone with type 2, especially someone with type 2 who's not dependent on insulin would need?
Yeah, and I should add, my father has had type 2 diabetes for, I don't know, 10, 12 years, I think. And the thought that I think of often when I go home a couple times a year and for the holidays, he's not, he doesn't have awareness of his blood sugars. He goes in for the checkups a couple times a year, and there's no check-in even in the mornings. And I keep thinking that if I could, seeing that type 1 is you're just sort of, you're dropped into a situation where you're just making inadequate insulin, and at diagnosis, there's a little bit, you're still making a little bit, but it's inadequate to keep blood sugars under control. And then there's sort of this slower progressive decline in like the loss of insulin production with type 2. And so I always think, could spending a day with someone with type 1 be sort of I don't know if motivating is the word, but like, could it
Eye-opening for
show
sure.
eye-opening? Yeah, that it's worth putting it front and center to sort of slow stop in some people, reverse that process to where they don't need to make these, whatever it was, 200 additional, decisions a day. Think about timing insulin, amount of insulin, how different foods affect it. Exercise is a lot more complicated. Sleep. When your body's kind of still doing its thing automatically, like get real, take action. Like try to do whatever you can to avoid getting to that tipping point where you're then dependent on injections every day or an insulin pump. Because with type 1, you don't have that option because you're kind of already there at diagnosis, and with type 2, there's this slow kind of progression that and I know I've talked to some people that when they're diagnosed with even pre-diabetes, they get busy. They buy books, they talk to people, they look up Facebook groups. They get busy and they try to figure out what's going on. What is diabetes? What where is pre-diabetes, and then where's type 2, and how does it all lead to each other? What can I do? Maybe like stop trying to just kind of do what the Joneses are doing around you. If everyone's kind of moving towards diabetes, be willing to do some different things. It's our health, it's our life, and we have to do what we need to do to be able to get the most out of life. And so with type 1, it's obviously more about how to get smarter around how to dose insulin and how to kind of maybe choose foods smartly. And then with type 2, I guess it's that, but it's also by doing that, you may not ever need to go on insulin, or I know this varies from person to person, kind of where things start, but I would think that would be an enormous motivation. I always told my dad, I was like, he's seen me growing up. He's seen his son take an insulin injection since he was 13. And I would think the idea of having to inject multiple times a day would be a very big,
very strong motivator.
factor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm getting this sense that you're feeling like it's not.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that pills are they're such a tiny part of your day. They're not inconvenience at all. They just like take a pill. And that's where, and we need them. I mean, there's no doubt we need all these we need a lot of these medications. And I think it's just kind of like, it's so much easier to prescribe a medication than it is to spend a couple months talking to someone once a day about lifestyle food choices. And clearly one is easier than the other. But what I've gotten from all the studies I've read about type 2 is that the sort of the current way of doing things is just almost guaranteed to allow progression to keep happening. It doesn't turn it around. It often speeds up the progression, the typical kind of recommendations you're getting. And that's I think I have a very strong sense of sort of health democracy, or I don't know what word to use, but people have a right to kind of see the bigger picture and be able to make decisions beyond just the short conversations they have with their healthcare team. Because there's usually a lot more to know than they're getting by going to a university and reading a paragraph on what is diabetes or what is type 2 diabetes.
Right. Man, I think
you don't need to be a professor.
No, you don't. And I think in the marketing, like we're going to do a whole series coming up, like a 4-part series on the marketing aspects of type 2 diabetes and supplements, and just we're really going to pick that all apart because it deserves a lot of time and attention. And I think in spaces like this, it's hard to do a deep dive into that part of it. Like, why is it epidemic in this country? Why is it that so few people had type 2 diabetes in the 1930s, and now we're at epidemic levels, and obesity is the same? Like, that's not something like, oh, this is why, this one thing. It's not that. And
it's not aging. It's not simply getting older.
Thank you. That's the big one too. So many people are like, well, I just got older. I think I say this on a third of all of our podcasts. It's just age. No, not at all. And I just, man, so much to unpack in that. That's very well said. Mm-hmm.
And the word that always that occurs to me, I think we had mentioned, we were discussing before, but just the normalization, like that word, like when we see things around us, it becomes nothing you're really working to go away from. It is normal. It is, you could say someone, I've got 4 people in my immediate family with type 2 diabetes. And so I'm going to get type 2 diabetes, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
That's where you kind of want to be like, okay, pause a second here. And like with like the rates of diabetes and obesity and all these, cardiovascular disease, all these things we're dealing with now that are the majority of what the money we're spending. I'm always intrigued by the studies that look at dramatic nutritional changes in populations, like where we can document there was a date. If it wasn't a date, it was a very short period of time when the food supply changed dramatically, and then suddenly the incidence of these diseases, where it was almost not even seen, is now sky high. And I always wondered how you could remember when I was working at the health department as an intern, I had these crazy ideas that I would tell anyone who listened. Of course, they'd pat me on the head and say, "That's great, Pat." But I was like, "What if we have like a billboard that can change the messaging, and it could list some of these studies in like a lay kind of version of like, like rates of diabetes that dramatically increase in this population over like a 10-year period. And here's the foods they ate after, and here's the foods they ate before. With that, would people pause and be like, holy crap, like I hadn't thought about that, 'cause we're now all eating the stuff that caused them to develop all these health issues. Before that, they would live into their 80s and 90s and then just kind of drop dead, and they'd be doing well. And often they wouldn't even need to brush their teeth, and their teeth were fine. And,
That piece is so fascinating to me as well. Like all
yeah,
that roughage and not having the sugary sweets, and you don't need dentist visits like we do. It's amazing.
right. Yeah. It's just, and it's just hard because there's no requirement for someone that's newly diagnosed with type 1 prediabetes, type 2 to, I wish they kind of would give you a stack of books and maybe say like almost like a book club or something like, well, let's meet
Yeah,
every
here's
week to
your
discuss the
required
first chapter.
reading.
Yeah. And it would seem overwhelming, but when you think about the amount of time ingesting that information and how it will change the rest of your life, it almost seems like a small ask. But I know everyone's lives are busy, and it's hard to suddenly, get a PhD in diabetes when you've been diagnosed, because it's a lot.
It's a lot. I
That's what I
think
think about public
it's a
health a
lot.
lot.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
hmm It's a lot.
And like when I went, oh, go ahead.
No, I wasn't saying anything.
I was just going to say when I was at a children with diabetes meeting a couple of years ago, there's a new pump manufacturer, and they were doing focus groups, and one of them was, and they're trying to be very innovative and kind of outside the box. And they're saying like, um, what do you recommend we discuss in our kind of educational clinics, when someone's getting this device? So like what new information, better information, what stuff do you wish you had been told? And I remember I raised my hand and said, I wish that we could explain what the heck insulin is, how it works, how insulin works in normal people. Like insulin's not a medication, it's a hormone. So people understand that, first of all, hormones are meant to be in very defined ranges. Again, this is the homeostasis, the whole cockpit analogy. And then kind of that it's more than blood sugars, it's not just the blood sugars. And so why, if we view diabetes as type 1 anyway, it's just sort of throwing the insulin at the carbs reading, we're not seeing the big picture.
Right.
And there's no opportunity, I think, to get that across. And so, we have this sort of report card every few months called the hemoglobin A1C. And as long as you're not super high, you're doing great.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're kind of failing people, and we need to be doing a little bit more to give them kind of the building blocks, the groundwork to understand some of the science. And we don't have to say it all in a science way, just that we need more than just the awareness that doing these calculations with carbs and insulin, that leads to problems. It leads to plummeting blood sugars. It leads to having some yummy food, and then it shoots up into the stratosphere, and then you have to give more insulin, and then it's down dangerously low, and you're going to the emergency department. There's ways to sort of be smarter than that, I think.
Yeah.
What I always think about.
I agree. And with my educator hat on, it's always, how much do you teach and explain and show to people at a higher level who want to gobble it all up? And then how much do you dumb it down, for lack of a better explanation of that? But like, how much simplicity do you use with people who appreciate simplicity? And I think most people appreciate keeping it very simplistic. And I think trying to keep it at a third grade reading level is important, but also having really great resources at that level to explain other physiology that's occurring. I think one of the most common examples of that I see is, I went to sleep and my blood sugar was 120, and I woke up and it was 190. Now explain that, because people want this easy, 1 + 1 = 2 when it comes to your physiology. And that's just not going to happen. And I tell people, I'm like, well, it's because you have a liver, your liver's working. And they're like, what? It's like, this is
Like, there are
the,
hormones that, no one has
yes.
to hear all those layers. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like you don't, it's like, do you want me to explain glucagon to you and GIP and GLP-1 and like all of these things? And I think that's an area where new drugs are being developed. GLP-1 receptor agonists were originally a type 1 medication with Similan and then an amylin.
I
And
forgot that. That's right.
yes. And now, when they found out the weight loss proponent, they looked at this and the blood sugar benefits. Then it was type 2. And then with the weight loss, it became obesity. But now I think more technology is coming out looking at a combination of those, especially with glucagon, to help people who have type 1 diabetes. And I think really interesting stuff coming down with that. And of course, islet cell transplant. But then anytime you have a transplant, there's anti-rejection medicines. A lot of people will ask me, like, can I just get a new pancreas? I'm like, well, it's really not even, that is not a simple thing. And it never ceases to amaze me the amount of people that ask about a pancreas transplant as if it's just like, well, take this out and plop that in, easy peasy.
You're good. Yeah.
I think just a basic, like, I love that you teach anatomy because it's such an important thing to understand, just basics of how your body works. Like, I think so many more people understand how their car works than their own body.
Right.
Fascinating.
And I give so many stories that relate to like my diabetes, or like we're just talking about respiratory, and I'm talking about the Kussmaul breathing when I've had years ago at very high blood sugars. And so the pH of your blood becomes too acidic and you're trying to blow off the CO2. And like, there's just so many ways you can tie diabetes or exercising endurance sports with diabetes into all these different systems. And like saying how the digestive system works in a certain way that's on automatic. And then you're like, and then that feeds back to the liver, like you're talking about. I'm like, you guys, it works that way. Me, does not work that way. And be glad it works for you guys the normal way. And what that looks like, talking about blood sugars with mine or my kids. And
and
I'm
it's
excited
not
to
just
see.
insulin. I think that's a big thing. A lot of
Right.
people, when they hear type 1, they think it's just you don't produce enough insulin. And it's not just that at all. There are other dynamics going on, like you said. Mm-hmm.
The timing. Yeah, I remember, I forget where I read it. I think it was Jocelyn said, back in the 30s, how difficult it is to control diabetes with insulin because you're producing insulin in the wrong way at the wrong time in the wrong location. And so trying to do that well is like an overly complicated equation that you're just never going to quite get right,
Which is why I'm so
putting it under your
thankful
skin.
for insulin analogs too, because it was that was a game changer between N and R moving to the rapid acting analogs and the ultra long acting and the long acting. That's huge, huge shift in diabetes management and freedom. As we're, not to interrupt you, because I know you were trying to go somewhere and I don't want to like shift it to a different area, but as is automated insulin delivery. And my understanding is that you and your children are on automated insulin delivery systems, different ones, even whichever one was most appropriate you felt for you. So that is a huge game changer, something that can stop insulin delivery as the blood sugars fall and give extra insulin as they rise if you didn't quite get that right with the matching, or if you're just being a kid and didn't take insulin for that snack because you're living your life. How did your family dynamics change with one of you getting on? Like, how did you all just have this big AID party and get on at the same time, or what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I've been on an AID system for a number of years before they were done. I guess I'm trying to think of when it was exactly that those came out. Like I have the Tandem system with Dexcom. I've had that for a number of years. I forget when that came out. I'm pretty sure I got it soon after it was a thing.
I think around 4 years ago. Does that sound right? in
Yeah,
terms
yeah,
of the
that all
feedback.
spins 4 years.
I think that's right.
Yeah, yeah. Because yeah, earlier it was more like a fuse box. It would just sort of turn off when it would. I always thought of it like a fuse box. It just turns off when it gets low, and now it can change the rates and it can kind of adjust things, and which is just a godsend. I mean, I went on one of my birthday bike ride quests last weekend. I rode from La Crosse, which is just north of Gainesville, out to the Gulf Coast, and just so often pulling my pump out while I'm riding, and like I have a bunch of different basal rates set up, and so if my sugars seem like they keep dropping no matter what I eat, I'd go to an even lower basal rate, or I'd just give myself the tiniest bit of insulin for the food I'm eating because I'm exercising, and just the things I take for granted, being able to um, just sort of, I can turn it off if I want to, so I'm not getting any insulin, and I can let my blood sugars kind of come back up. So much more control over what's happening like an hour from now, based on what I'm doing with my pump settings, and just kind of being aware that it's always like the safety net that will kind of shut itself off, even if I haven't looked at it in 30
And if your
minutes, it
life
turns it
gets
off.
busy and you're not paying attention.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
huge.
yeah. It's huge. And then with the kids, yeah, I think we knew that we wanted to go on. We knew that an AID system was the way to go. And we didn't initially. I think we initially tried the pump itself, and it was almost just like just to see how they do with the pump, and then we were like, okay, how quickly can we get them on the AID system? Even with those, you're still. It's not, again. It's not like it sort of takes the weight off your shoulders, but it's nice to know that something's kind of watching them when we aren't every moment. It's much better at it's still a safety net. It doesn't somehow magically keep them in a normal range, but it's worlds better than just giving them an injection, monitoring it,
Exactly. And
finger sticks.
I think what you said about attention is really crucial with this. You cannot get on an automated insulin delivery system, just slap it on every 3 days or every time you need a reservoir change with the Tandem. You can't just set it and forget it. I mean, to an
Yeah, yeah,
extent you can, but not if you're going to eat a carbohydrate containing meal. And even then, like, regardless, you can't. You have to pay attention, and that's in every single pump manufacturer will say you still have to follow up with your doctor. You still have to maintain, um, you have to adjust things as needed because they're only as good as your initial settings. Some, have adaptation. Across time, it can adapt more to you, but still the carb to insulin ratios and the sensitivity factors need adjusting according to what you're doing. And, you know, I think that the whole activity piece is huge, and understanding that you don't really give insulin right now for what you need right now. And that delay and the understanding of how insulin works is really crucial. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've helped somebody start an insulin AID system, automated insulin delivery system, and then maybe the blood sugar rises 5 milligrams per deciliter, points, and they're like, see, well, I just started this, so why is the blood sugar going up? And it's like, you started 5 minutes ago, and this insulin doesn't even start working for about 18 minutes that you're on. So that's
right.
a place where I see education really having a gap for sure. And then when it
Yeah,
peaks, and stacking insulin is huge as well.
right. And like you were mentioning, like with the sort of, I think everyone wants to be able to sort of set it and forget it, or kind of likes the idea of that. I've noticed over the years, just going to ADA, American Diabetes Association meetings and other meetings, and there seems to be sort of this big emphasis on not overburdening, I think, patients when they're first diagnosed and even ongoing. And I
Huge
think that
emphasis.
has, yeah, it's like this is a huge thing to drop in the lap. So let's just give them the basics, and they'll be better off. Don't change what you're doing. And I guess I sort of understand that, but then I don't at the same time.
Yeah.
You have
If I,
diabetes.
yeah.
Like,
Right. And I think you hit the nail squarely on the head, and I think it is important to start with the basics and keep it simple. But where I see, and I think what you're alluding to, and you can add in, is that there's step one and it's keep it simple and da da da. But what's step two and step three and step four? Like, where are the add-ons to education and information? Because I agree, there's so much effort there in the beginning and how you handle it, and huge strides have been made. I remember covering down on pediatric endocrinology 20 years ago or 18 years ago was totally different than now in ways. And you talk about like a food complex and all of that. Like, I remember endocrinologists and a couple of nurses saying, like, you can't have a cupcake if there's a birthday party, forget it. And I'm like, what kind of cruel and unusual punishment is this? Like, no. And now it's like, that's fine, just match it with the insulin. And like, what a world of difference in terms of eating disorders, which are very prevalent in the space of people who have type 1 diabetes. And it's such a great thing to see a progression in that space too.
Yeah, that's what, and I think there's also like with my comment about, with diabetes education of the future, kind of give more information. I think there's also not the awareness of the larger health issues out there, like if diabetes is distilled down to simply insulin and blood sugars, I think you're missing a lot of information that will entirely empower you to make better decisions. And so like what these hormones, again, what insulin does, the kind of issues that the greater population is dealing with, a lot of those, are due, of course, to higher than normal levels of insulin. And so, in other words, you can make choices that will better control your sugars that will also, it's like I want to like underline and emphasize the also move you away from all the complications other people are dealing with nowadays. It's not just insulin. It's not just if you can keep your blood sugars okay, you're golden, because there's more to it than that. But
Yeah.
again, I understand we don't want to overwhelm, families. We don't want to overwhelm. I think it's just you're sort of seeing with the diabetes world, I guess what it's not unique to type 1 or type 2. It's just that we can't give all the information we'd like to give in healthcare visits, and so you get the kind of the Cliff Notes version of all these processes and conditions and decision making.
Yes.
I'd love to see some sort of online like quizzes you can go through. That there's all these scenarios. Like Susie has type 1. She's 10 years old. She's arriving at a party. These are the foods she has. Her blood sugar is 80. She's got 2 units of insulin on board. What would be a smart decision for her to make, or something like that? Same with type 2, just how to, or for pre-diabetic, what could you choose in sort of a virtual environment, kind of, I don't want to say quiz, but like learning environment, to get them to be able to make better decisions in the real world. I'm sure that's already being done somewhere.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure somewhere somebody listening's like, we do that. So come, we'll interview you.
Yeah. Let me know.
Let's talk about
well,
it.
You bring up a good point as well. And just that, like, we're talking about, I'm making a choice, right? It's either A or B. And I would argue that like we make a lot of weighted choices, right? That the education's only so good. Yeah. Really what we're doing is asking people to make unusual or oftentimes difficult choices. Do you have thoughts, from an education standpoint, what can we do to make the air quotes good choice easier, particularly for like, say, your kids' generation or their kids' generation? They've got a lot more technological support maybe than you did at that age, but they're still very much in an environment that, even kids without type 1 are going to be increasingly likely to develop type 2. And a lot of the behaviors that are good for type 1 are good for type 2. It's just, in fact, just good human behaviors, period. What can we do for our kids, for our young adults to make that more of a even choice, as far as food selection, whatever?
I just want to add to that, childhood, I got this morning from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics headline: childhood obesity could affect 227 million worldwide by 2040. And that was up by like 6 million from the last prediction. It was just unreal. Sorry, Pat. I just thought that was a good add-in for that space.
Yeah, and this is what I always get in my head when I'm dealing with kids parties and snacks that are handed out. It's there's I think this sense that the adults that are part of these, in these scenarios, I ate this stuff when I was a kid. I'm fine. I don't know if no one's aware of like the per capita sugar consumption, how it's increased. Like no one knows all these numbers. I know that, but or the rates of all these conditions that might be in part related to sugar or other types
Some
of foods.
scientists know those numbers and study them, and it's frightening. Yeah, the pounds of sugar that we eat per year.
Right. And it's just like anytime you want to make kids happy, the easiest, cheapest way to do it is going to be give them some form of sugar. Everyone's going to be happy. They got a cool reward, a cool treat. I think it's just knowing that, and you nailed it with the question of how do you make the better choices, smarter, easier. It's like the whole public health world is trying to figure out. And it's just like what I always think about is like I'm always thinking of shortcuts, I guess you could say. Like, how can I put things on my plate that will get me fuller faster, will also control my sugars, so that I'm not feeling deprived remotely. I'm not feeling as though I'm making decisions for my blood sugars that will somehow make me an unhappy person, wishing I was doing all these other things or eating other foods. And so I think the more you make decisions that lead to good outcomes, when you're daily seeing these patterns that relate to what you're putting in your body or the decisions you're making and what your sugars look like, initially all these foods might have been weird, or this was just like an impossible ask. At some point, it very much switches to it could not be easier.
Yeah.
It is what works, you're going to stick with. And it's hard, I guess, to get people to understand that they will think differently a month or two down the road. They will like different foods a month or two down the road.
Yeah.
And then it's worth doing those things to, keep your blood sugars where they need to be, avoid hypertension, avoid weight gain, all these kind of things. And at the same time, never be hungry. I think it's the hunger part that I wish more kind of books and dietary approaches focused on. These recipes will keep you full, and it's sort of like distant second, and it'll keep your blood sugars better and prevent weight gain, because no one ever wants to feel like they're being told, well, you just got to cut out 500 calories, to lose that weight. And
not sustainable.
You have to be real specific about how to do that. Yeah.
Right. Because if you're not real specific on how to do that, you're going to lose lean body mass. You're going to quit. You're going to be angry. You're going to so many things. And I think that's crucial, that it might be challenging in the beginning, but as you do it and do it again, and it's repeatable, and you're going to wind up 2 weeks, 2 months down the road, and you're like, oh, yeah, that was challenging in the beginning, but it's so worth it now with how I feel and how I look and the way I can move. And that's one of the biggest things I hear from people is I move and feel so much better. Like the joints are less crickety, if you will. We call it the rickety cricket. So like you're so much more fluid and mobile. And it's a hard thing to explain to someone who hasn't done it, to get over that hump of the challenge in the beginning, but people, and I've heard from many people who have type 1 diabetes who say this was a godsend. And I'm like, and I even hesitate, like, as I say it, I'm like, oh, watch out. And nobody come at me, like, how could you mean that? And I've asked them, like, what do you mean? How could you say that? You've got to give insulin. You've got to manage all these things. And they say that because their parents progressed to type 2 diabetes and had some major complication, and they've seen what diabetes can do. But because they paid attention to the food they were putting in their body, the movement that they had, their quality of life was increased with their movement and mobility. And they're on usually no other medicines other than insulin, because their blood pressure numbers look great, their cholesterol numbers look great, and they're living their fullest life with type 1. And I know thousands of people with, like, I know hundreds of people personally, but I know of thousands of people with type 1 who live the fullest, most joyful life while also managing this really horrible chronic disease, but they don't let it control and rule their life. And it sounds like you're in that group too, Patrick. So I'm going to add one more person to the amount of people I know like that.
I just like the idea of figuring it out so that you can just do anything. And because you have your insulin, food,
Yes.
blood sugars worked out, it is just another thing that comes along for the ride. It's not, I've heard people say that they're scared to go for a half-mile walk because, their blood sugars plummet, and you're like, okay, let's sit down and talk about this. Like,
Amen. Right.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, we can figure this out. Absolutely. You probably had a bad experience that scared the crap out of you, but like, this is figure outable. That's not a real phrase, but
I
like
like
we
it.
can we can turn it, we can figure this out. And I have a student
Absolutely.
that's been in the emergency room many times with type 1, and I just so badly want to like explain what, tell me like your day, like tell
Yeah.
me how,
Like, come
is
move
it
in with
always in
us
the
for a
afternoon?
month. You got to do the dishes,
Right.
but
Right. Yes. Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot about that is if you could just share, there's people around with diabetes, and then there's people that just sort of have it figured out.
yeah,
And I hate that those people are just somewhere that no one else can see or interact with them. And so I always feel like
absolutely.
the most underutilized resource to help folks with diabetes is other people with diabetes. Even in this,
Absolutely.
we're all connected,
Absolutely.
but real conversations that I think are hard to find, not just pats on the back. I know what you're going through. There's a lot of that in type 1 kind of support groups, but you're like, why are we talking about the low blood sugars that their kid has, during and after soccer practice? Get the details laid out
Right.
and try to understand
What
what is
happened? How
the
do we
thing.
prevent it in the future? How do we
Yeah.
share this widespread so that the coaches, the other parents who have kids with type 1 in sports, there's a ton, like,
Yeah.
kids with type
Totally. Yeah.
kids with type 1 are in sports all across this nation and the globe. It's
Yeah.
it's very, very important. I love talking about activity with insulin and type 1. I love it. And I love the research on that. So we'll just say it really quickly. Wind
Yeah.
sprints at the end of an activity are very helpful to help stabilize blood sugar. You want to start your reduction of insulin usually about an hour prior to your exercise, potentially having a 15 to 30 gram snack. Patrick, share your tips. You're more experienced
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
this than me.
And it's only the last couple long bike rides where I haven't had any lows that were remotely dangerous. I use UCAN, which is a very slow releasing cornstarch kind of product, and so it doesn't have the normal exercise liquid fuel that just kind of spikes and comes back down. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like this background level of glucose that's always being kind of slowly absorbed and digested.
Yeah.
And so as long as I'm taking a pull of that every 30 or 45 minutes, and then I'm snacking on top of it, I can usually keep, again, with basal rates being lower, I can usually prevent any scary just bottoming out of blood sugars. So I don't get to that sort of hitting a wall with like, 45 blood sugar where you have to just stop and just sit for 45 minutes. And so it
That I
makes my
have heard
rides
is
go a
just the
lot
worst. Like, that's the
shorter.
thing that will
Yeah,
tick off somebody who has type 1 diabetes so much, is like, I can't do my workout because the sugars are just they're way
absolutely.
too high or way
Yeah.
too low. And I love that there's a product with cornstarch in it for that, because that is a recommendation that I would often do with people who'd had bariatric surgery and were having experienced some
Mhm.
hypoglycemia from that, not having diabetes, but having low blood sugar reactions. Often used
Yeah.
cornstarch for those.
it was invented for kids that had glycogen storage disease,
Okay.
where they just couldn't. So when the blood sugars are low, and most of us without diabetes or without that condition, your liver will mobilize glucose and your sugar starts to drop to the lower end of normal to kind of bring it back up. Usually it happens, after a number of hours after you've eaten, like the middle of the night. These kids did not have, I can't remember if they don't make glycogen, the storage form of glucose, but they don't have the ability to sort of increase
They
their blood
can't
sugars
store it.
automatically.
They can't store it in the
Yeah.
liver. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so they came up with this way to have this food you could eat at a point in time, and then it would slowly raise your sugars for 2 or 3 hours later. And I was kind of like, that's brilliant. That's exactly what I need,
Right.
because
That's so cool.
it's not the big Gatorade hit that shoots it up. Another thing I've found is that fasting exercise and first thing in the morning when I've got no real insulin on board except the basal makes it so drama free. It's you almost want to shout it from the rooftops that like
Exercise in the morning.
Exercise in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In the afternoon, if I try to fit something in and it's been, even 2 hours after lunch, there's still some remaining insulin on board and I'll see that drop, in the morning, if I can manage to wake up with a normal blood sugar, don't eat anything, maybe a glucose tablet to start it rising. I can go for a long run, longish, and my blood sugars will be just fine and kind of pretty simple. I always bring glucose with you. Always.
Yes.
I've learned that.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I've got some in my pocket, glucose tablet. They're always on my person. One or two stops at a random stranger's house to ask for juice, and you decide this is enough of that.
You never know what you're going to get. Yeah.
Figure this out. Yeah. Yeah. You never know who's going to open that door. It's going to be weird.
Or what they're going to,
you. Yeah.
I've heard some stories of in the type 1 circles of people eating really atrocious things because of lows. Because like if it's passing out or having this cookie that dropped on the ground with some boogers on it, we're going to take the cookie every time.
I pull the glucose tablet out of the dirt when I'm biking and you're like, well, yeah.
Patrick, every week on the podcast, we try and kind of land the plane with an actionable thing that our folks can do out there. As someone who has type 1 and has 2 children that have type 1, you're probably one of the subject matter experts in, let's just call it, caregiver management of type 1 diabetes.
Also the school of hard knocks.
What would you say to the parent that may be listening? Because I don't know that we have a lot of kids with type 1 listening to this podcast. What would you say to that parent that just got the news that the person that they love the most in this entire world has this now scary disease that they have to manage? Is there any words of encouragement, or is there anything that you could tell them to get off to a good start and to really maximize the opportunities and chances for their kids?
That's a dynamite question. A big question. I think what I wish, and this relates to what I'm about to say, but I think what I wish when I was diagnosed was that I could have met 2 or 3 families who have kids that have had type 1 for 3, 4, 5, 10 years and they're doing well. I think that would have had such a huge positive impact on me as a kid and my parents being having me be just diagnosed, that they're going to be okay. Like, you want to hear that from other parents that, my kid plays football or my kid is, just getting into college and, they're doing okay. They need to know that this does not change your future. You don't sort of, whatever plans you had, don't just somehow get sort of laid aside when you're diagnosed. Yeah. And that the more and I think, again, I hate to keep quoting Jocelyn, but he had a quote that was something like, the more you know about diabetes, the longer you're going to live, like the better you're going to live. And so like, that was very accurate back then. It's equally as accurate now. Look for information, find people, if it's a mom with type 1 kid, find other moms that have kids maybe of the same age, roughly. Ask them details, find out how they do things. And and don't just kind of take the teeny tiny amount of information you get when you're diagnosed and sort of hope that's enough, because it's rarely enough. You need to look for more information. There are resources out there of people that have been through all these things. And I think what always bothered me when I was thinking about sort of what you can do for folks with diabetes or type 1 is I don't feel like every person should have to go through this up and down, inefficient trial and error. I don't know why we can't pull information from those who have been down the road to make that sort of progression a little more steady, a little less trial and error. There's not going to be no trial and error, of course, but I don't know why in this day and age we all have to kind of reinvent the wheel at diagnosis. And so talk to people, find people. There is a way to very much compartmentalize type 1. It doesn't need to be, well, here's another crappy day of ups and downs. Like, there's a way to figure out why the ups are happening, why the downs are happening, and adjust things to get this to where you have more steady blood sugars. And oftentimes that's not just going to come from like your healthcare team. It's going to have to be you kind of digging in,
People
finding
living with
people,
it
finding
every
resources.
day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Talking to someone, drive to the town over or meet with someone, have a coffee with another parent that can say, I know exactly what you're going through. Here's how we're doing things. Here's how we changed, so that you don't have to sort of make the same stumbling blocks that everyone else has made. We're all very with I think with diseases, we're all kind of play close to the chest. It's especially kind of true, I think, how people manage type 1 and I guess diabetes in general in some cases. And I'm afraid that the playing it close to the chest leads to more of this trial and error, reinventing the wheel for other people. And I wish people would share how they do things, not just necessarily a pat on the back, but like how are they handling sports and sleeping and insulin dosing? Clearly you have to involve your healthcare team, but I think you could get some good nuggets of info to then take back to your healthcare team from these conversations.
Yeah.
And be like, we're going to try this. How can we do that?
Absolutely.
They're a different family.
If only there were a podcast dedicated
Absolutely.
to success stories in the diabetes space that you could listen to every single week with new episodes dropping on Monday. Man, I tell you what, somebody's going to figure this out, and they're going to do really well.
That was an Academy Award plug.
You're
right
welcome.
there. Wow.
That was great. That was good stuff. Yeah.
I think, oh my gosh. Okay. I'm losing what I was going to add here. And so it's becoming a non-additive, but I would say I've leaned more towards group trainings for that reason that you said, Patrick. And I've noticed I had a group training with 2 people who have type 1, and I was helping them start their automated insulin delivery system. And it was great because, believe it or not, one of them was deathly afraid of shots. Imagine you have to have insulin and you're afraid of shots. So he wasn't really taking his insulin, and the other person was very, very well managed, took everything very seriously, was a lot like you, Patrick, with that. And in that space of them being together and him feeling safe to be vulnerable about his fears and share with her, and sometimes during these group trainings, I make it a point to like, I have to go talk to your physician for a minute, or like I'll step out and let them just connect and share phone numbers. And I find that it's so helpful because that feeling of not being alone, that somebody else has been through this and I can do this. And in this particular gentleman, his A1C went from 11 to a 7.8 at his follow-up in the span of like 2 months time. It's just beautiful to see.
For that interaction.
Yes. For that, wow. Well, starting of AID and the interaction, because she, and, as you said, how you're able to monitor your children's blood sugars. There's something called Dexcom Follow, and there's the Libre View, and then there's Gluco, and there's other systems that allow, healthcare workers and family members to view blood sugars and take care. There's your Dexcom follow. Yeah.
Yeah. Look at they're
And
almost
those
the
are
same. It's never
beautiful
happened.
numbers. Look, they're
Yeah.
showing off 84 and 85. You
I
have
punch them on the
twins.
shoulder when their sugars are the same. Yeah, I give them a double punch. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. But I think that you hit the nail squarely on the head. And that was one thing when I worked in a diabetes education group before. We always had people saying, is there a support group? Do you have a support group? Do you have a support group? And it just broke my heart to say, no, do you want to start one? You know, like I have 3 kids under 5 and this job, like I can't lead it. You do it.
Right.
But I think that's really crucial to have. It's really important. Mm-hmm. And we
My wife and I,
do that
whenever
with
I
our
go to
group
my
every Sunday, every first Sunday of the
it's
month.
so
Mm-hmm.
huge. Yeah, it's just whether it's online, and I'm so excited when I hear about folks trying to gather families with type 1 or people with diabetes together, because there's so many stories I think could change lives. Things that someone did, sort of aha moment someone had years ago, that they're now in a whole different place with their control. And yeah, I've tried to, and I've had some conversations with, you know, my adult endo. You know, I'm always saying, like, can we, you know, can I start something? You know, I could put a flyer up that says this is not reflective of university.
This isn't affiliated.
This is just get away from all the HIPAA concerns. But I feel like there needs to be a way to connect people.
I agree.
It's been, like you say, it's been harder to do than it should be, probably.
And now I remember what I was going to say. I would say 80 to 90% of what I have learned about the real life day-to-day struggles of people who have type 1 and people who have type 2 is just when I listen to people in endocrinology visits or during their education visits, like just listening to their experience and asking questions and getting curious. That's how I have learned the majority of what I know about diabetes, because you learn everything book smarts in school in the beginning, and you absolutely have to stay on top of the latest scientific research that comes out and the medications available. But in terms of that experience and how to do things, which then leads to the research to help support that and that back and forth, it's listening and getting curious that has always been crucial. And so if you find an endocrinologist that listens to you and that is curious, you have found gold, and they are out there.
It's huge. Yeah. And that word curiosity, I was stuck on this a few years ago, thinking about how to sort of help folks with diabetes. And there's something about the curious patient. And I've discovered this in the literature. It's outside of diabetes. There's many titles in the literature on curiosity amongst folks with chronic diseases. There is something enormous about someone that wants information and is remotely, innately curious to get more.
And when I can vouch for that.
They're going to reach out. They're going to find stuff. They're going to find books. They're going to talk to people. And I think that is so darn critical to getting it under control and understanding your disease, is that curiosity. And it's tough because not everyone has time to be curious, or the resources to be curious, and
the resources to be curious. So true. Yeah. I've had so many I can think of trainings and education sessions that I've done in the past. And the best ones are with people who are curious, because I can't tell you how many times where 95% through with the session, and then a question comes up and I'm like, oh yeah, that brings up a great point about da da da. And then another question, oh my gosh, yes, that's when that happens.
Building on it.
It just, it's so crucial. It's a great point out. Yeah. So I know Richie's going to yell at us soon for our time.
Good.
But Richie's like, no, I'm not.
It's all good
No,
stuff.
you're good. You're good. Patrick, my gosh, I feel like I want to have you on again. This is beautiful.
Happy to.
We have so much to
This
talk about.
was fun. This is a lot of fun.
Yay.
This is all stuff in my head that's always bouncing around. I actually get to get it out once in a while. It's therapeutic.
Good. Get it out. We love it. I think it was, and I think you've accomplished your goal of being a resource, of being a voice in this space of what is it like and what you can do, and giving hope and offering hope. I think that we like to give very sound information, very grounded information. Speaking of, like, there's tons of information out there, but you do have to be a discerning person with the education because it's not all quality. But then offering hope, because it does you no good to have information like the statistics on amputation or retinopathy. That, who cares if you can't do anything about it, but you can. And that's what we like to speak to and bring it all home in the end about, is you have so much power in that space. You are empowered.
Yeah, and I always like when I hear about, I don't know why, but I always like when I hear about athletes with type 1.
Yes, I do
'Cause
too.
you feel like, yeah, it says you can do crazy things, you can do amazing things, and like, and I don't like to think of having type 1 as something that makes me weaker. I like to think that
Your
that's just something I'm dealing
superpower.
with,
Mhm.
and you can manage it, and you can be, like, why can't someone with type 1 be in better shape than someone who doesn't have type 1? Like, of course you can. Like, if you manage
Of
your
course you can.
diabetes and you do other
Mhm.
things, you can be a race car driver, like what's his name, or you can be a football player, you can climb Everest, you can do whatever you want to do. You just have to do it with diabetes coming along for the ride and being managed effectively.
Yeah. That's what I always
Yeah.
think about. Sometimes I do trainings for Omnipod, and people are like, I have dogs, I can't put this here and there. And I'm like, I know a football player with, a professional football player on Omnipod. So,
Yeah.
like, you can find ways. Where there's a will, there's a way.
Right.
Always.
Yeah. 100%. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you
This
for
was
your
fun.
time. And thank you so
Have fun
much for
too.
coming on the Diabetes Podcast. We'd like to thank Dr. Patrick Rowe for reminding us that attention beats perfection, language matters, and community shortens the learning curve. Here are today's quick takeaways. Lead with curiosity and seek real-world mentors. Other families are an underused superpower. Tech is a safety net, not a set-and-forget solution. Know your settings, timing, and trends. For kids, frame food without shame and keep decisions connected to insulin, context, and numbers. Movement is doable with planning. Think timing, basal adjustments, and always carry fast carbs. If you're watching this on YouTube, please give the video a like and share it with someone struggling with type 1 management. As always, if you have further questions or need additional support, please reach out to us at support@empowereddiabetes.com. Until next time, take courage. You can do this, and we can help.